30,000 years before the world we know, Earth looked very different. The continents were colder, the oceans were deeper blue, and the skies were clearer than they are today. Mountains stood untouched, and huge animals roamed freely across open plains. Humanity was still young, small tribes living in caves and forests, trying to understand fire, stars, and the mystery of life. Far beyond the solar system, on a planet where the sun burned white instead of yellow, another race of beings was watching. They were explorers, scientists, and dreamers. For hundreds of generations, they had searched the universe for signs of life. Their technology was far beyond anything humans could imagine, yet their curiosity was very similar to ours. One day, their telescopes detected a small blue world shining faintly in the darkness. The reading suggested that the planet was alive, breathing through forests, pulsing with oceans, and echoing with strange sounds. That world was Earth. The discovery stirred excitement among them. After long discussions, the Council of Explorers decided to send a small group to study it closely. Months of travel passed as their craft crossed light years of empty space. When they finally entered the solar system, they slowed down near the moon and stared at the blue planet below. They saw huge ice caps at both poles, deserts glowing like fire, and clouds wrapping the planet in soft white lines. It was beautiful, untouched and wild. Their leader gave a quiet command, and the ship began its descent toward the southern part of the planet, an endless white land that would one day be called Antarctica. The air outside was freezing, but that made it the perfect hiding place. They didn't want to be seen by the young species walking on the surface. The craft cut through a blizzard and landed softly on the ice. The ground cracked under its weight, sending echoes across the empty plain. Inside, the explorers looked out through their windows, seeing nothing but endless snow. Yet deep below, their scanners detected something remarkable: natural caves, tunnels, and hollow spaces formed by geothermal heat. That would be their home for the mission. They spent days digging and melting the ice, creating an entrance large enough to move their equipment inside. Once underground, they began to build their base. The structure took the shape of shining metal arches, powered by energy that produced no smoke or heat. When they finished, the base looked alive, a glowing heart beneath miles of frozen silence. Their purpose was simple: observe, learn, and record. They wanted to understand how life began here and how it might grow. Every day, small observation drones flew out of hidden vents, rising above the snow and drifting over the land like tiny sparks. They recorded the behavior of early humans hunting animals, making tools, and painting strange shapes on cave walls. The explorers watched these scenes with deep interest. One of them once said that humans reminded her of their own ancestors: curious, emotional, and endlessly inventive. Even though they were different in form and language, she felt a strange connection to them. The others agreed. They began to call humans the children of the blue world. Years turned into centuries. The explorers collected thousands of recordings, images, of rising smoke from the first fires, songs whispered beside rivers, and migrations across continents. Each new discovery filled their archives with wonder. But then, one quiet morning, everything changed. A message arrived from their homeworld, a distress signal unlike any they had received before. A massive solar event was threatening their star system. If they did not return immediately, they would lose communication forever. Inside the Antarctic base, the explorers gathered in silence. They looked at one another, uncertain. Their mission had been to stay for a long time, but now, they had no choice. They had to leave. The leader made the difficult decision to shut down the base. They began packing their data crystals and dismantling sensitive instruments. But there were systems that could not be taken: huge reactors, magnetic tunnels, and the heart of their archive buried deep in rock. Removing them would cause a collapse. So instead, they decided to seal everything and leave it behind, hidden and protected. Before leaving, the leader recorded a final message into the memory core. To those who return, remember what we have seen here. This world has life worth protecting. Watch from afar, but do not interfere. Let them grow in their own time. When the last words were spoken, the base lights dimmed. Thick layers of ice began to close over the tunnels. Soon, nothing but cold wind remained above. The explorers boarded their ship and rose into the sky. From space, they looked down at the blue planet one last time. It seemed peaceful, unaware that its oldest visitors were leaving. Then in a bright flash, the ship vanished into the dark. Centuries passed. Ice grew thicker, covering every trace of the base. The planet changed slowly. The humans, the explorers, once watched learned to plant seeds, build shelters, and tell stories about the stars. None of them knew that beneath the frozen south an ancient structure slept, quiet, patient, waiting. On the distant homeworld, the explorers returned safely, but found their people facing disaster. Their star had grown unstable, burning hotter each year. They built protective domes and underground cities to survive. The knowledge they brought from Earth became part of their science, their art, and even their hope. Many generations later, the story of the Blue World expedition became a legend told to children. Over thousands of years, their civilization recovered. They traveled again among the stars, colonizing new systems, building great cities in the sky. But the legend of Earth never faded. It was taught in schools, sung in songs, and painted on walls. Everyone knew that somewhere far away, there was a small world filled with oceans, forests, and the first species that reminded them of themselves. As centuries turned into millennia, memory became myth. The coordinates of Earth were kept in old archives, sealed away in dusty vaults. Few believed it was real. But one day a young historian uncovered the original data, flight logs, sensor recordings, and the coordinates of the hidden base beneath the ice. He presented his findings to the council. At first, many laughed. To them, Earth was just a story for children. But the historian insisted. He showed them pictures of early humans, recordings of blue oceans, and the message left by the first leader: return after 30,000 years. Those words caught their attention. The timeline matched perfectly with their current year. 30,000 years had passed since the first expedition. The council fell silent. After long debate, they agreed. It was time to return. A new team was selected. Scientists, explorers, and engineers. Their ship was much larger than the first one, capable of faster travel and advanced scanning. Before departure, they visited the Museum of Ancient Expeditions, where the memory of the first crew was honored. A statue stood there, a figure looking up at the stars, holding a small globe that represented Earth. Standing before it, the new leader promised quietly, "We will find what they left behind. We will finish what they started." When the ship launched, it shone like a silver star cutting through space. Families and officials watched it rise until it disappeared beyond the clouds. For the travelers, the journey would take only months, but they knew they were heading toward something much greater than exploration. It was a reunion with the past. As they traveled through the endless blackness of space, they often looked out the windows wondering what the blue planet would look like now. Would it still have oceans? Would its people still live in small tribes, or had they grown? They didn't know that the world they were returning to had changed beyond anything they could imagine. Back on Earth, life had evolved through ages. Humans had built cities, machines, and satellites. They had walked on the moon, dug into the oceans, and created stories about visitors from the stars, never realizing those stories were partly true, and beneath the oldest ice, far below where even modern machines could reach, faint energy still pulsed inside the forgotten base. It was weak but steady, like a heartbeat waiting to be heard again. In the vast distance, the alien ship moved closer to our solar system, guided by faith and memory. They believed they were coming back to continue their study. They didn't know that what awaited them was a mystery even greater than the one they had left behind. Their leader stood near the observation window, watching the stars slide past like rivers of light. In his hand, he held a small piece of ancient metal, a fragment taken from the first expedition's archives. It was engraved with a simple line: "We came to learn, not to rule. He whispered the words softly, almost like a prayer. For him, this was not just another mission. It was a journey to honor those who came before, and perhaps to understand what had become of the world they once called the Blue Planet. As the engines hummed quietly and the crew prepared for arrival, no one could guess that what they would find on Earth would rewrite everything they believed about their history, and ours. The story of the forgotten arrival was about to meet, its long-delayed ending 30,000 years in the making. After months of travel through the dark silence of space, the ship finally slowed down. In front of the crew, the sun burned bright like a golden fireball, and around it circled small worlds, the planets the first expedition had once recorded. Everyone in the control room stood in quiet awe. They had studied the pictures of this solar system in history books, but seeing it with their own eyes was something else. The blue planet was there, shining softly among the stars. It looked calm, familiar, and beautiful. For a few moments, no one spoke. They just stared. Some felt as if they were returning home, even though none of them had ever been there before. The leader broke the silence. 30,000 years, he said softly, and it still looks alive. The ship began to approach Earth, guided by automatic systems. But as they came closer, strange readings appeared on their scanners. The planet's energy patterns were nothing like the old data. Instead of quiet natural signals, there were millions of small artificial ones, radio waves, satellites, and power grids lighting up the night side of the planet like stars. The crew looked at each other in confusion. Could these be signs of intelligent life? Someone asked. The leader nodded slowly. Yes. It seems the humans have evolved far more than we expected. They turned their attention to the poles where the ancient coordinates pointed. The southern pole still shimmered with ice, though it looked smaller than the old records. Yet something was wrong. The base that once lay buried there should have been easy to locate with their advanced scanners. But there was nothing. No metal reflections, no tunnels, not even a trace of energy. They checked the numbers again, thinking there might be a mistake. The same result came back, empty. The coordinates were correct, but the base was gone. Leader frowned, staring at the data screen. Impossible, he muttered. Our ancestors built structures that could last millions of years. How can it just vanish? The team decided to go down for a closer look. Their ship entered Earth's atmosphere quietly, wrapped in a soft field of energy that made it invisible to human eyes and radar. They descended through clouds and storms until the endless white of Antarctica stretched beneath them. From above, the land looked quiet, no life, only frozen mountains and valleys carved by the wind. The ship hovered just a few meters above the surface before landing. Snow rose around them in slow spirals. When the doors opened, cold air rushed in. The ground beneath was solid ice, several kilometers thick. They stepped out, their boots sinking slightly into the frost. The temperature was deadly for most life, but their suits kept them warm. Using portable scanners, they began to search the area. The instruments sent pulses deep into the ice, mapping everything below. Hours passed, and yet the results were the same. No structure, no walls, no machinery. The base that was supposed to be here simply didn't exist. One of the scientists sat on the ice, silent. Could it have melted? He asked softly. The leader shook his head. No. Even if the planet warmed, there should be traces. Metal, minerals, radiation. But there's nothing. They expanded the search radius. The ship floated above them, its lights sweeping across the frozen landscape. Still, the screens remained empty. The feeling of unease grew. Finally, one of the scanners picked up something faint. Tiny magnetic patterns buried deep under the surface, too weak to be natural. They dug down, carefully melting layers of ice until they reached the spot. There, embedded in frozen rock, were small fragments, metal dust and shards so ancient they looked like part of the ice itself. They collected the samples and analyzed them inside the ship. The results confirmed what they feared and hoped. The metal came from their own technology. That meant the base had been here once. The leader stared at the fragments on the table. So it was real, he said quietly. But what happened to it? One of the younger members suggested, maybe the humans found it. Everyone turned to look at him. It was a daring thought, but it made sense. If the humans had developed machines and cities, perhaps they had also explored this frozen land and discovered what was buried beneath it. The leader considered the idea. If they did, then we must find out what they learned, he said. We need to understand how our base disappeared. That night, the crew stayed in orbit around Earth, hidden above the clouds. From there, they observed the planet more closely. They saw millions of lights glowing across the surface, cities stretching across continents, moving vehicles, and satellites circling high above. The sight amazed them. In 30,000 years, the humans had built an entire civilization. They had created their own machines, languages, and technology. The explorers watched in silent respect. These beings, who once hunted with stones, had now reached the stars, in their own small way. But the mystery of the missing base haunted them. If humans had indeed found it, why was there no sign left behind? There should have been stories, ruins, or signals, but all their scans showed nothing. The next morning, the leader gave a new order. We will search their records. Somewhere, on this planet, the answer must exist. To do that, they needed access to human information systems. So, a small team of specialists prepared for what they called ground contact. They had technology that could change their appearance, allowing them to blend among humans for a short time. It was risky but necessary. The team landed at night, far from the icy continent, near a remote island research station that belonged to one of the human countries. They observed from a distance, scientists in thick jackets walking between buildings, machines drilling ice samples, and antennas sending data to satellites. One of the aliens, now disguised in human form, approached, the base pretending to be a traveler lost in the storm. The humans welcomed him, offering food and warmth, unaware of who he really was. While staying there, he accessed their network quietly, gathering information about Earth's polar research history. Days later, he returned to the ship with what he found. It wasn't much, but one word appeared again and again in the secret archives, Project Helix. The leader ordered the system to translate all related files. Slowly, the story began to unfold. Decades earlier, in the early 2000s, human scientists had discovered something deep under the Antarctic ice, a strange metallic structure that emitted unusual energy readings. At first, they thought it was a meteorite or a natural mineral formation. But when they tried to dig it out, their instruments failed and the area started to behave strangely. Compasses spinning, radio signals fading, even machines breaking down without reason. Governments took over the site, sealing it from the public. Construction of a secret research facility began. They called it Project Helix. Only a few people in the world knew what it truly was. The aliens read the records with growing disbelief. The description matched perfectly with their own base. The humans had indeed found it, but then the documents became unclear. Reports spoke of growing instability inside the structure, strange light beneath the ice, and finally, an explosion that destroyed everything. Satellite images showed the area collapsing into the sea, leaving only floating ice. The files ended abruptly after that, labeled as Lost Operation. No more reports existed. It was as if the event had been erased from human history. The crew sat in silence, each processing what they had just learned. Their ancestors' base had not simply vanished, it had reacted when humans touched it. But why? The leader stood near the window, looking down at the planet. Our ancestors built safeguards, he said. They may have triggered the base to protect itself, or perhaps to hide forever once it was discovered. He turned to the others. Either way, it means they didn't want to be found, but the humans found them anyway. That thought filled the room with quiet tension. The explorers realized their mission had changed. They had come expecting to resume an old study, but now they faced a mystery that stretched across time and species. The leader looked once more at the glowing blue planet below. Its lights flickered like millions of stars. We came here to rediscover our past, he said softly. But maybe what we'll find is about their future. Outside, Earth turned slowly, unaware that ancient visitors had returned. searching not for conquest or glory, but for a piece of history buried in its frozen heart. The ship's engines hummed quietly as it drifted above the clouds. The crew knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere on that vast planet lay the answer to what really happened 30,000 years ago. And as they prepared for their next step, none of them could imagine that the truth waiting below would change everything they believed about their own kind and about humanity. The blue planet continued to glow beneath them, peaceful yet filled with secrets. And the explorers, who had once been the first visitors, were now its silent witnesses once again. The next morning, the alien ship hovered once again over the frozen land of Antarctica. From above, the world looked calm and endless, sheets of ice stretching beyond the horizon, white light reflecting off the snow like a mirror. The explorers had spent the entire night studying the files they had found about Project Helix. Still, many questions remained unanswered. How could a structure as powerful and ancient as their base disappear without leaving a trace? And why did every human record about it suddenly stop? Determined to know the truth, the leader ordered a new investigation, a deeper one. The ship began lowering scanners that could read far beneath the surface, even through solid rock. Soft, blue light spread across the snow as the sensors hummed quietly. The results appeared slowly on the screens inside the ship. At first, everything looked ordinary. Thick layers of ice, compacted snow, and frozen stone. But then something strange began to appear. Tiny lines of magnetic residue, like invisible fingerprints, were scattered deep below. They weren't natural. They were the faint remains of artificial energy. The leader stared at the data carefully. "This is it," he said softly. "These are traces of our ancestors." Encouraged, they sent out small drones equipped with drills and thermal scanners. The drones melted thin tunnels into the ice, reaching deep underground. Hours later, one of them detected a hard object buried far below. The team watched as the drone's camera focused. The surface looked like metal but was fused with rock, as if it had melted into the earth long ago. The scientists carefully lifted the fragment to the surface. When they examined it, they realized it wasn't just metal. It had writing on it. The symbols were faint and distorted, but they belonged to their own ancient language. The crew grew quiet. For a long time, no one spoke. They had found the first physical proof that the base had truly existed here. But the letters looked twisted, as though they had been changed over time. Some parts even seemed to have been rewritten by someone else. Someone who tried to copy their language but didn't fully understand it. The discovery sent a chill through everyone. That meant humans might have come into contact with the structure, tried to study it, and maybe even learned parts of their symbols. The leader held the metal fragment in his hand, studying the scratches. "If humans reached this deep," he said slowly, "then they saw what we left behind. And perhaps something saw them too." He ordered the drones to continue digging. But as they went deeper, the signals started to weaken. The ground seemed to absorb every bit of energy they used. It was as if the earth itself was protecting something. Later, the team detected a hollow area deep beneath the ice, a large empty chamber with smooth walls. Excitement filled the room. Could this be the last part of the base that survived? They prepared a small expedition to enter it directly. Wearing protective suits, 3 explorers descended through a narrow passage, following the path carved by their drones. As they reached the lower level, their flashlights reflected off something strange, black stone walls that were not natural. They were perfectly shaped, forming a circle around the space. The floor was covered with a thin layer of frozen dust, and at the center stood a single pillar of ice, taller than any of them. Inside that pillar, something faintly glowed, a light pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. They approached it carefully. The glow flickered brighter for a moment, then faded again. One of them reached out to touch the ice, but the leader's voice came through the communicator, warning him to stop. "Do not disturb it," he said firmly. "We don't know what it is." They scanned it instead. The readings were confusing. Not radiation, not electricity, but something older. something alive in a way they couldn't explain. It wasn't dangerous, but it seemed to react to their presence, almost as if it recognized them. Back in the ship, the leader watched the readings with growing fascination. He felt that this glowing structure might be the last remaining part of the base's central system, maybe the heart of the entire installation that had once recorded the early life on Earth. They decided to extract a small sample of the ice for study. But when they tried, the tools began to fail one after another. The drills froze, the lights dimmed, and the communication link broke for a few seconds. When the connection returned, the explorers inside said they had heard a faint sound, a low humming, almost like a voice whispering through the air. After that, the leader ordered them to return immediately. The glowing pillar was left untouched, frozen once again in the darkness. That night, while the crew analyzed the data, they discovered something even more surprising. The frequency of the humming sound matched a pattern they had seen before. It was the same resonance used in their ancestors' technology to activate memory cores. The leader stood still as the realization sank in. The base hadn't been destroyed. It had been shut down, locked away by a command that had come from within. Maybe their ancestors had done it intentionally, or maybe the system itself had gone into protection mode when humans found it. But the biggest mystery remained. Why did it erase every sign of its existence? The next morning they returned to the surface. The wind howled across the plains, carrying tiny crystals of ice that sparkled in the pale sunlight. The leader looked around at the endless emptiness. It was hard to believe that beneath this silent world, a piece of history older than any human civilization was still sleeping. He thought about the humans who once dug here, the scientists who might have uncovered the base thousands of years after it was buried. What did they think when they found something they couldn't explain? Fear? Curiosity? Awe? He imagined them standing at the edge of discovery, unaware that their actions were waking something ancient and powerful. The leader turned toward the horizon. If humans truly found it, he said quietly, then they must have left signs somewhere. A record, a memory, anything. He decided to widen the search. The crew began to scan beyond the icy continent, searching for any human archives connected to Project Helix. They intercepted old radio transmissions, satellite data, and even signals from abandoned research stations. Slowly, a picture began to form. It seemed that after the explosion that destroyed the human facility, all information about it was buried under government secrecy. The project was erased from history, and those who worked on it disappeared from records. To the public, it never existed. The aliens listened to these old transmissions in silence. Some voices trembled with fear, others with disbelief. Words like energy surge, collapse, and light beneath the ice repeated again and again. The leader closed his eyes for a moment. They touched something they were not ready for, he said softly, but he didn't blame the humans. He knew that curiosity was part of all intelligent life. His own people had done the same thing long ago, reaching, discovering, sometimes breaking what they couldn't yet understand. Still, one question haunted him. If the humans had activated the base, where did all its energy go? A system that large couldn't just vanish. It had to go somewhere. He ordered another deep scan, this time beyond the continent. The sensors reached far into the ocean, the mountains, and even into orbit around Earth. After long hours, they finally found something unusual, a weak but steady signal coming from high above the planet. It wasn't human-made. It was far, older, carrying a pattern that matched their ancestors' technology. The signal was faint, like a whisper lost in the noise of space. But it was there. The leader smiled faintly. So it didn't die, he said. It moved. He looked around at his team. The base may have transferred its memory somewhere else, perhaps into orbit to protect itself. We need to follow that signal. The crew began preparing for departure. As the ship slowly lifted off the ice, the white landscape stretched endlessly below them, cold, silent, and full of hidden stories. From above, it looked peaceful again, as if nothing unusual had ever happened here. Yet deep below, the faint glow inside the frozen pillar pulsed one last time, like a quiet goodbye. As the ship rose higher, the leader watched the Earth growing smaller beneath them. "Our ancestors built something extraordinary," he said, "but now it belongs to this world. Whatever happens next, we must respect that." The others nodded silently. None of them knew what they would find when they followed the signal, but they all felt the same strange mix of fear and wonder. They weren't just explorers anymore. They were witnesses to a story that connected two civilizations, one ancient, one new, across the distance of time. Far above the clouds, the signal kept calling, faint but steady, leading them toward the next chapter of their search. And as the ship turned toward the stars, the frozen land below faded into mist, holding its secrets close once more. The mystery of the empty ground was only the beginning. What lay ahead would challenge everything they thought they knew, about the past, about Earth, and about themselves. High above the clouds, the ship drifted in silence, following the faint signal they had found. For hours, the crew watched the small pulse blinking on their screens. It wasn't strong enough to identify clearly, but it was constant, steady, and unmistakably old. The pattern was one their ancestors used for long-distance data storage, a kind of code that carried memories across space. The leader stood in front of the main console, his eyes fixed on the pulse. "It's weak," he said, "but it's not random. Something out there is still alive." The signal led them into low orbit, where thousands of human satellites surrounded the planet like glittering dust. It was a maze of metal and radio waves, making it difficult to find the source, but their scanners were far more advanced than human technology. After a long search, they found it, a small object floating among the broken remains of an old satellite. The object looked ancient and simple, no bigger than a human's hand, but it gave off the same magnetic frequency as their ancestors' machines. Carefully, they used a robotic arm to bring it aboard. When the object was placed inside the analysis chamber, the lights dimmed slightly. It pulsed once, then went quiet. The scientists began scanning it, layer by layer. The readings confirmed their suspicion. This wasn't human. The material was the same alloy their ancestors had used 30,000 years ago. It was one of their own memory cores. Everyone gathered around as the leader placed his hand on the console to begin the decryption process. The ship's systems hummed softly as the ancient data started to wake. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then a soft light appeared above the table, forming patterns that slowly turned into images. The crew gasped as they saw what appeared on the screen. The images were recordings, real footage of Earth long before cities, before civilization. Vast forests, roaring rivers, herds of wild animals running free. And then, among them, small groups of early humans building fires, painting walls, and staring up at the night sky. It was the lost archive of the first expedition. For hours, they watched the memories unfold, their ancestors observing the planet, studying life, learning how humans evolved. The faces of those long-gone explorers filled the screen. They looked proud, curious, and somehow peaceful. It was like looking into a mirror from another age. Then, near the end of the recording, something unexpected appeared. The last message, a farewell left by the first leader before leaving Earth. His voice echoed through the room, calm and clear even after 30,000 years. "If our base is ever found, it means this world has awakened. Let them grow on their own. Return, not as watchers but as equals." The room went silent. Every word carried weight. The message wasn't a warning, it was a promise. Their ancestors had believed humans deserved their own path without interference. The leader lowered his head. "They wanted us to respect them," he said quietly, "to learn from them, not to control them." But as they studied the final part of the data, they noticed something strange. The recording didn't end with the farewell message. The last few seconds showed a flash of light, then static. Embedded within that static were new data points, coordinates, but not on Earth. They pointed somewhere else. When decoded, The coordinates led to a location in human databases, an old research facility on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, long abandoned. The humans once used it for secret experiments, but it had been shut down years ago. Curiosity sparked again among the crew. Perhaps, they thought, this facility held the missing connection. Maybe the humans who discovered the base had stored what they found there before it vanished. They decided to investigate. Within hours, the ship moved quietly over the Arctic, hidden above the storm clouds. The world below was covered in snow and frozen sea. Through the clouds, they spotted a cluster of ruined buildings half buried in ice, the remains of the human research base. They landed nearby. The air was heavy and still, and the temperature was brutal. Their boots crunched over the frost as they approached the dark entrance. The doors were frozen shut, but one gentle push from their energy tools opened the way. Inside, everything was covered in dust and ice. Broken machines, empty hallways, and long-dead lights filled the space. It felt like time itself had stopped here. Using their scanners, they followed the faint energy traces that still lingered inside. The readings led them deep underground where a small room was sealed behind thick metal walls. The door was locked with human codes, but their systems easily bypassed them. When the door slid open, the room glowed faintly from the light of their suits. At the center stood an old computer, half broken but still intact. Dust covered its screens, but beneath it lay something even more surprising. A strange metal box with markings that didn't belong to humans. The symbols were their own, written in the ancient script of their ancestors. Everyone froze for a moment. The box was small, yet the energy coming from it was strong. Carefully, the leader lifted it onto a table. When he touched the surface, the markings began to glow softly, as if recognizing him. A light beam projected from the box, showing holographic images in the air. It displayed human scientists working near the old Antarctic site, digging through ice, uncovering metal structures, and setting up machines. They looked amazed, like children discovering something extraordinary. Then the footage showed the disaster, bright light, shaking ground, and then darkness. After the collapse, the box recorded another image, this time not of humans, but of their old base breaking apart. Instead of exploding, it seemed to fold into itself, disappearing into a blinding flash of energy. The light in the recording faded and silence followed. Then, one last message appeared on the screen, not from the humans, but from the base itself. Human contact detected. Relocation protocol activated. Data preservation engaged. The meaning was clear. When the humans discovered the base, it had activated a safety mechanism. It moved its core memory to protect itself. That was how the memory sphere they found in orbit came to exist. The leader stood quietly, watching the hologram fade. So, it wasn't destroyed, he said. It chose to hide. But there was still something else. The box also contained recordings from the human scientists' research logs. These were old, grainy videos showing them speaking into cameras. Their words were filled with wonder and fear. They said they had found technology that couldn't be human, metal that never rusted, and machines that seemed to heal themselves. Some of them believed it was evidence of ancient visitors, while others called it a natural anomaly. In one of the recordings, a human voice said softly, "If anyone ever finds this, know that we didn't mean to wake it. We just wanted to understand." The leader listened to that sentence over and over. There was no anger, no greed, only curiosity. It reminded him of his own people's early explorers. They too had once reached into the unknown just to learn. The aliens collected all the data from the facility, transferring it into their systems. They restored the human files, preserving them alongside their ancestors' recordings. Two stories, now connected, one of the first visitors and one of the humans who found their traces. Before leaving, the leader placed the metal box back where they found it. He didn't want to erase the human part of this story. "Let it stay," he said quietly. "This belongs to both of us now." As they walked out of the frozen base, the wind howled through the ruins. The sky above was turning dark and snow began to fall. The leader looked up for a moment, watching the flakes drift slowly toward the ground. In that moment, he felt something strange, a sense of peace. Back aboard the ship, the crew sat together in silence, each lost in thought. They now understood what had happened. Their ancestors had come to study, left behind a base, and when humans found it, the base had hidden itself. In doing so, it had left behind messages, not of warning but of respect. The leader looked at Earth through the observation window. The planet was covered in clouds, glowing softly under the light of the sun. He thought of the humans below, billions of them living their lives completely unaware of the long story that connected them to visitors from another world. He spoke softly to his team. Our ancestors were right. This world deserves its own path. We've seen their courage, their mistakes, their questions. They're not so different from us. The others nodded. There was no more debate, no need for further proof. The truth was clear. Humanity had grown into something remarkable on its own. As the ship prepared to leave orbit, the memory sphere they found continued to glow faintly, still carrying the old recordings within it. They would take it back as a symbol, not of lost technology but of shared history. Before the ship turned toward the stars, the leader looked down one last time at the blue planet. "We came searching for what was ours," he whispered. "But what we found belongs to them." And with that, the engines lit up. The ship rose higher, moving silently through the night sky until it vanished beyond the edge of sight. Down below, Earth remained unaware, still spinning quietly in space, a world once visited, then forgotten, and now finally understood. Druidar humans had no idea that far above them, old watchers had returned only to realize that the true story of evolution was no longer theirs to tell. It belonged to Earth itself. But the mystery wasn't finished yet. Among the fragments of data recovered from the Arctic base, one hidden file had gone unnoticed. A strange signal repeating. The ship drifted through the dark side of the planet, silent and still. Everyone was resting, but the computers were not. They continued to process the data collected from the Arctic base, scanning every fragment of code for missing details. Then, without warning, a new signal appeared. It was faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing from far away. The ship's systems automatically locked onto it, and a soft chime woke the leader from his short rest. He looked at the monitor, still half asleep, but the moment he saw the pattern, he froze. It was the same frequency as the ancient base. The signal wasn't coming from Earth. It was coming from deep space, far beyond the moon, near the edge of the solar system. At first, the team thought it might just be leftover data bouncing off debris, but the pattern was too perfect, too deliberate. It was a call, repeating over and over, as if waiting for someone to answer. The leader ordered the ship to follow as the engines came alive. The stars stretched like lines of light. They left Earth's orbit quietly, gliding through the dark emptiness toward the distant signal. No one spoke much. The air in the cabin felt heavy, filled with anticipation. After all they had seen, the recordings, the base, the ancient messages, this signal might finally reveal the last missing truth. Days passed in the silence of space. The crew took turns monitoring the signal, trying to decode its structure. It carried information in short pulses like breathing patterns. The deeper they went, the stronger it became. Finally, their scanners detected something, a cluster of objects orbiting a small, frozen planet. It wasn't a planet anyone had mapped before. It had no atmosphere, no signs of life. Yet the signal clearly came from there. As they approached, the objects became clearer. Enormous geometric shapes made of metal and ice, orbiting slowly. Some looked like broken ships, others like structures half buried in frost. The crew stared in awe. It wasn't human. It wasn't natural. It was something built long before any civilization on Earth. "This must be it," the leader said quietly. "The last trace of our ancestors." They brought the ship closer, scanning for entry points. Most of the structures were dead, no power, no movement. But one tower still glowed faintly with energy, the same pattern as the signal. It was calling to them. They decided to land. The surface was rough and cracked, covered in frozen dust. As the team stepped out, the sound of their boots echoed faintly through the thin air. The tower stood in front of them, tall and silent. It was ancient, but it still carried the design of their kind. Elegant curves, sharp lines, and symbols, glowing faintly beneath layers of frost. Inside, everything was preserved perfectly. No decay, no rust. The air itself seemed frozen in time. They walked down long corridors lined with strange symbols and empty chambers. The deeper they went, the louder the signal became, pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat. Finally, they reached a circular room. In the center was a massive crystal sphere floating above the floor, glowing faintly. It looked similar to the memory core they found earlier, but far larger. As they approached, it reacted, spreading light across the walls. The leader reached out his hand, and the moment his fingers brushed the surface, the entire room lit up. Suddenly, the walls turned into screens, showing scenes from long ago. They saw their ancestors again, not as travelers but as builders. The images showed them constructing this very outpost far from Earth, meant to be a memory vault, a place to keep their knowledge safe forever. The recordings played faster, showing centuries of quiet. No visitors, no messages, just silence. Then one day, a sudden flash of light, the base on Earth sending out its final transmission before vanishing. The vault had received it, stored it, and waited ever since. Now, after 30,000 years, someone had finally answered. But as the light continued to shift across the walls, the message changed. New images appeared, ones the crew had never seen before. They showed something strange, something unsettling. The recording showed the ancient explorers watching early humans from above, not interfering, just observing. But over time, some of the explorers began to disagree. They wanted to stay on Earth, to live among humans, to share knowledge and guide them. Others believed it was too dangerous. They argued that humans were still too young to understand, that revealing themselves could destroy both worlds. The disagreement grew into a division. Eventually, a small group of explorers secretly stayed behind on Earth, blending in, hiding their identity, while the others left. The ones who stayed took fragments of their technology with them, small devices, energy crystals, and data stones. The recordings ended abruptly after that. The room fell silent, the light fading slowly. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. "So, some of them never left," one whispered. The leader nodded. "Maybe that's why the base vanished. It wasn't just hiding from humans. It was hiding from its own kind." The thought sent a chill through the group. It meant that the Earth they had just visited might still carry traces of those who stayed behind, not as invaders, but as forgotten descendants of the first visitors. They downloaded all the data from the vault and prepared to leave, but as they turned to go, the crystal pulsed again. A voice echoed through the chamber, soft, old, but still clear. "If you have come this far, then our story is yours to finish. We left our mark not in machines, but in hearts. The ones who stayed, they became part of the world." The leader stood frozen. The message seemed to imply something deeper, that the humans on Earth weren't just an experiment, but perhaps distant relatives of those ancient visitors who stayed behind. It was a thought almost impossible to accept, yet it made sense. They had always wondered why humans developed intelligence so quickly, why they shared so many instincts with them. Now, maybe they knew. On their way back to the ship, no one spoke. Each crew member was lost in thought, trying to process what they had seen. The stars above looked endless, but for the first time they felt smaller, connected somehow to that little blue planet they once thought was just another world. When they reached orbit, they activated the communication system. The vault's data began to sync with their ship's memory banks. As it did, strange new symbols appeared, coordinates pointing not to another planet, but to a human city. The coordinates belonged to a place that once held one of the largest human libraries, a place where history and science were preserved for generations. The vault's message was clear. The answers you seek are among them. The leader sighed softly. It seems our journey isn't over yet, he said. The others agreed. They would have to return to Earth one more time. But this time, not as explorers looking for a base, as visitors seeking truth among the humans themselves. As the ship began its long journey back, the leader stared out the window, watching the vault shrink into the distance. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, deep within humanity, the past still lived. Not in ruins or machines, but in memories, instincts, and the endless desire to explore. Back on Earth, the signal from space suddenly faded, replaced by silence. Scientists who monitored deep space frequencies noticed it but dismissed it as interference. No one knew that far beyond their atmosphere, beings who once watched over them were now returning, not to claim but to understand. The leader's thoughts wandered as the ship entered Earth's orbit again. He imagined walking among the humans, observing how they lived, how they dreamed. Maybe he would see a spark, something familiar, something that reminded him of the old recordings. Do you think they'll ever know about us? One of the crew members asked quietly. He smiled faintly. Maybe not, but they don't need to. They've already carried our story farther than we ever could. Below them, the planet glowed softly in the light of the sun. Cities sparkled like stars, oceans shimmered, and mountains stretched like ancient guardians. It was beautiful, alive, vibrant, and full of the same mystery that had drawn their ancestors here in the first place. As the ship drifted silently over the world, the leader felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Maybe the real discovery wasn't about finding lost technology or hidden bases. Maybe it was about realizing that creation continues, that even after thousands of years, life finds a way to remember. And somewhere in the endless expanse of that blue planet, someone might be looking up at the same stars, wondering if they are alone, just as his people once did. He turned away from the window and whispered softly to himself, "They're not alone." They never were. The ship began its slow descent toward Earth, the light of dawn breaking across the sky. The story that started 30,000 years ago was finally returning home. But neither the humans below nor the travelers above knew that what waited next would change both forever. The signal had ended, but another was about to begin, this time from Earth itself. The sky above Earth was calm that night. Millions of stars blinked softly, unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen. Far beyond the clouds, the alien ship glided silently into orbit, hidden from human eyes. Inside, the crew prepared for their final mission. They had decoded everything from the vault, the recordings, the history, the warnings, and now all paths led to one final location on Earth. It wasn't a military base or secret lab this time. It was a library, an ancient human archive, built centuries ago to preserve knowledge. The coordinates pointed to that exact place. The leader stood by the observation window, staring down at the blue planet. So much had happened, from finding the lost memory core to discovering the truth about their ancestors and the humans. The journey had changed him. When they first arrived, he had only wanted to recover what was lost. Now he only wanted to understand. As the ship descended through the clouds, the lights of the human cities shone like scattered gems. Roads twisted like glowing rivers. Cars moved like streams of fire, and tall buildings reached for the stars. The planet didn't feel primitive anymore. It felt alive, creative, full of wonder. They landed quietly on the outskirts of a sleeping city, hidden in a forest just beyond the edge of human sight. The air was fresh, cool and heavy with the scent of soil and trees. The leader stepped out first, feeling the ground beneath his feet. It was firm, warm, alive, very different from the frozen planets and metallic stations he had known all his life. "Stay close," he told the others softly. "We're here to observe, not to interfere." They walked through the trees until the glowing lights of the city appeared ahead. In the middle of it stood a huge building made of stone and glass. That was the library, the last piece of the puzzle. Using their cloaking devices, they moved unseen through the quiet streets. The city slept peacefully. Only the hum of machines and distant sirens filled the air. When they reached the library, they saw it was still standing strong even though it was old. Its walls carried stories of generations, a human attempt to preserve everything they had learned, just as the aliens' ancestors had once done. Inside, rows of shelves stretched endlessly, filled with books, records, and digital screens. The soft glow of small lights created a peaceful atmosphere. The crew began scanning the area, searching for the signal the vault had directed them to. The readings led them to the lower floor, into a restricted section filled with old materials that humans rarely touched anymore. Dust floated in the air as they walked between rows of shelves. Finally, they stopped near a glass case. Inside it was a small object, round, metallic, and covered in ancient markings. It was one of their own artifacts. The leader's heart raced. Somehow, this piece of alien origin had found its way into human history and been kept safely, without anyone realizing what it was. He gently opened the glass case and picked it up. The metal felt warm, alive. The markings began to glow faintly as if recognizing the touch of its own kind. The device projected a small light in the air, forming a holographic image. It showed both alien and human symbols, merging into one another, a fusion of two worlds. Then a message appeared in their ancient language. They have carried our spark. Protect them, and they will protect the future. The leader watched the words fade. For a long time, no one spoke. Then he said quietly, "This was never about reclaiming what was ours. It was about seeing what they've become." The others nodded silently. The message from their ancestors was clear. Humanity had become the continuation of what they once were. The same curiosity, the same hunger for discovery, the same desire to create and understand. As they explored deeper into the library, they found something even more surprising, a section dedicated to space exploration. Humans had collected stories, photographs, and even sound recordings of stars, planets, and galaxies. They spoke of dreams to reach other worlds, of building ships that could travel beyond their solar system. The leader smiled softly as he read through some of the writings. Humans were trying to reach for the stars, just like their ancestors had thousands of years ago. It was almost poetic. Then one of the crew members called out softly, "Look at this." He pointed to a wall covered with human art. Paintings of constellations, strange symbols, and mysterious shapes. Some of them matched the ancient symbols used by their people long before they left Earth. The leader stared in disbelief. "They remembered," he whispered. "Not through technology, but through memory, through imagination." He realized that humans hadn't forgotten their presence completely. Somewhere deep in their collective memory, a faint trace remained. A story passed through generations, told in myths, drawings, and dreams. Maybe that was the real connection. Not blood or technology, but memory. The idea that something greater once touched them and that feeling of wonder never left. The leader placed the glowing artifact back into its case, closing it gently. He didn't want to take it away. "Let it stay here," he said. "It belongs to them now." As they prepared to leave, he looked around one last time. The library was quiet, filled with the sound of air flowing through the vents. The smell of old paper and ink mixed with the hum of computers. It was a temple of knowledge, a place where humanity had built its own legacy. They left silently, walking back through the empty streets. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. Birds began to sing. The city slowly came to life as humans stepped out of their homes unaware of who had just walked among them. From a hill nearby, the leader stood and watched the sunrise. The warmth touched his face, and for the first time he truly felt the beauty of this planet. Not as a visitor, but as someone connected to it. He thought about everything his people had learned. The lost base, the vault, the hidden message, and now this library. It all led to one truth. Their story and humanity's story were never separate. They were two sides of the same beginning. "Maybe," he said softly, "our ancestors never really left." Maybe they lived through them. His words hung in the air for a moment. Then the crew turned back toward their ship. It was time to go home. The journey back to orbit was silent. Each of them carried a different feeling: peace, pride, and a quiet sadness. They had come so far to find their lost history, only to realize that it had already continued without them. As the ship rose higher, the view of Earth grew smaller, but more beautiful than ever. The clouds glowed like silver, the oceans shimmered like glass, and the land below looked alive with motion and light. From the observation deck, the leader whispered, 30,000 years later. And it's still the same miracle we once discovered. The others smiled. They knew this would be their final visit. There was no need to come back again. The story was complete. The world they once studied had evolved, and their place in its history was no longer as watchers but as part of its foundation. Before leaving the solar system, the leader ordered one final act. He asked the ship's computer to send a small silent transmission to Earth, a farewell message encoded in a simple pattern of light. The message carried no words, only music, a soft, harmonic tone that echoed across frequencies humans used for deep space communication. It wasn't loud or intrusive, it was peaceful, almost like a whisper. Weeks later, scientists at a human observatory detected the faint signal. They couldn't identify its origin. Some said it was cosmic noise, others said it was interference. But one of them, a quiet researcher working late at night, listened closely and said softly, "It sounds beautiful." And so, the message reached them, not as proof of aliens or evidence of lost civilizations, but as a gentle reminder that somewhere out there, they were not alone. Meanwhile, the alien ship continued its long journey back through the stars. The crew watched as Earth faded into a tiny blue dot, glowing softly against the endless black. The leader closed his eyes and spoke the final words of their mission log. "We came searching for what was lost. We found that it was never lost, at all. It had simply changed form and learned to dream." The ship's engines hummed quietly, carrying them home across the darkness. Behind them, the faint signal of their farewell still lingered, mixing with the endless hum of the universe. On Earth, life went on as usual. People worked, laughed, loved, and looked up at the night sky. Some wondered if there was life beyond the stars, while others believed the universe was silent. But somewhere deep in their hearts, a quiet feeling remained, that maybe, long ago, someone had already been there, watching, caring, and leaving behind a spark of themselves. The story, that began 30,000 years ago, finally came full circle. The visitors had returned, not to take, not to rule, but to remember. And the Earth, ancient, fragile, and full of life, continued to turn beneath the stars, holding both their history and their future within its heart. The universe was vast, but in that moment it felt connected. One endless story told through time, light, and memory. And though the ship vanished into the distance, the story never truly ended. It lived on. In the curiosity of a child looking at the stars, in the dreams of explorers building rockets, and in the quiet hum of that faint, mysterious signal that sometimes whispers across the night sky.